Hello and welcome to Fintech Chatter, brought to you by Tier 1 People, leaders in Fintech executive search. I'm your host, Dexter Cousins. Today's guest is David Hyman, CEO and co-founder of Lendi Group. In May 21, Lendi and Aussie Home Loans merged to form the Lendi Group. Last time David was on the show, Lendi was Australia's leading home loan platform with a team of 470 people, a loan book of 7.5 billion, and a customer base of more than 25,000 Australians who had settled more than 12 billion in home loans. Today, Lendi Group is home to the industry's leading platform technology. It has a network of over 1,200 brokers, a head office team of 600, a loan book in excess of 80 billion, and a retail footprint of more than 225 stores across the country. But before we chat to David, we've got a Chief Information Officer opportunity with a well-funded payments startup that has significant backing. You'll get to take the business from startup to scale up, work with a top-class CEO, own the technology strategy, and provide leadership to a growing team. This is a business with genuine unicorn potential. To find out more, message us at info@tier1people.com or go to the Tier 1 People LinkedIn jobs page. Welcome to the show, David.
Thanks for having me, Dexter. Great to be back.
It's great to have you back. And I was just thinking, I think it was 18 months ago that we last had you on. The world's changed a lot, but your world at Lendi Group has changed significantly. Would you like to tell our listeners a little bit about what's been happening the last 18 months?
Yeah, well, it's been a bit of a whirlwind. And I think, for the same reasons that all the listeners would be familiar with, we've obviously been dealing with, the roller coaster that is COVID and lockdowns and reopenings and all that sort of stuff. But in the background, and actually we did a lot of this in lockdown one, we've recently merged the Lendi business with Aussie Home Loans to form Lendi Group, as you just described. And, it's been a really, really interesting process to go through on the back with the backdrop of, the global pandemic and, changed engagement methodologies and all that sort of stuff, not just in terms of from the business perspective, but also with shareholders and all the other elements that kind of go into bringing a merger like that together.
So I was really surprised when I kind of first read the announcement because, Aussie CBA owned. Can you tell us a little bit more about the merger, how it came about, and how now this new group's structured?
Yeah, absolutely. So about the merger first is probably a good place to start. If I sort of maybe just kind of frame up a little bit, Lendi was started back in 2013, and we sort of had a simple premise, which is home loans are unnecessarily complex and difficult, and we think there's a better way to solve that, whether you're a customer, whether you're a broker, or whether you're a lender. And off the back of that, I guess, simple premise, we built Lendi into, again, I'll use 2020 as a reference point in terms of when we started working on the merger, into ultimately what at the time was the leading online home loan platform, obviously in an emerging category, but a category where we had sizable market share, well in excess of 90% in that part of the market. And ultimately, what was quite interesting to us when we started looking at the opportunity with Aussie was while Aussie was a retail business and the leading retail mortgage broking business, it was ultimately the original disruptor in the space. So back in almost 30 years ago, actually, when John Simon started the business, it brought competition to the mortgage market in Australia, and certainly not, technology-driven competition, but competition nonetheless. And as a result of that, certainly, sits there today as one of the most recognised brands in financial services, one of the most trusted brands, and certainly is a household brand. And the opportunity for us really was, if you sort of think about the Lendi platform as being a platform in the middle of the market, the opportunity for us was to ultimately take all of that kind of secret sauce, so to speak, or all the IP that we've built from a technology perspective, and roll that out to Aussie customers and Aussie brokers. And that's ultimately what we're seeking to do with the merger. And so the way to think about Lendi Group is it's now a group that operates the Aussie, the Lendi, and the Domain Home Loans brands, which are the sort of three brands in our stable. We run it as a single operation, so we have a single organisation structure to support those brands. And we're in the process at the moment of migrating all of the Aussie brokers and customers onto our platform. So over the next kind of 12 to 18 months or so, we'll be substantively done in terms of that migration. And from a customer proposition perspective, will allow us to really take that technology-driven proposition, platform-driven proposition, and back that up with, as I said, one of the most trusted brands in financial services. And to give a bit of background to the second part of your question around CBA, so you're 100% right. Aussie was a wholly owned subsidiary of CBA before this merger. And a bit of background there was, as I said, Aussie was started by John Simon a number of years ago. And between sort of 2012-13 and 2017-18, CBA in tranches bought the business from the Simon family. And I'm not sort of speaking out of school because they sort of stated this stuff publicly in sort of 2018 when the Royal Commission was happening. They stated, their intentions to divest the business. And our conversations with them, from a strategic perspective, I guess all centred around, the points I just made in terms of what the opportunity was to put the two businesses together. And as a result of that, we landed on a merger structure where CBA is still a shareholder. They're a minority shareholder, and they sit there in the same class of shares as all the other shareholders on the share register. But what was really important to us and for CBA was that there was effectively autonomy created. So we've got an independent board structure with an independent chair, and while CBA has one board seat, that's one board seat out of 8 seats on the board. And we've got really strong, as you'd imagine, information protocols around, sharing of information, et cetera. And they really sort of sit there now and act and behave like a financial investor, which is really positive for the business. And it's also allowed us to, it's quite an interesting topic because, a wholly owned subsidiary of a bank has to effectively abide by, the compliance and regulatory regime of an authorised deposit-taking institution. And while, this is not a conversation about necessarily stepping down that bar, what it's allowed us to do as well is set up our own right-sized risk management framework, which is, allowing us to bring some of the nimble, I guess, heritage of the Lendi business into the overall group in a way that's positive for everyone.
Now, in the intro, I kind of pointed out a couple of, stats. Loan book in excess of 80 billion now since the merger. I mean, that is just huge. How as a founder of the business, I mean, how are you feeling about all of this? Because that is serious scale.
Yeah, look, no, you're 100% right. It is serious scale. To be honest, if I'm being completely honest, the numbers are very large, and the zeros do get a little bit daunting sometimes. But
yeah,
at the end of the day, I think the way we think about it is, ultimately why we're in business is to help customers get into homes in a way that's easier than the past. We want to build an experience that's better than the status quo. And if the outcome of that is that we help more people into that outcome and our loan book grows, hopefully that 80 billion passes 100 billion at some stage in the near future, and we'll, perhaps next time I'm on the show we'll be talking about something north of that. But look, they're big numbers, but I think, in the context of a business that's at, sizable scale, it all sort of fits in that context.
Yeah. So from a customer perspective, how do you think that this merger is going to really benefit Aussie customers and Aussie homeowners?
Yeah, look, it's a really good question. I mean, look, Aussie home loans customers and homeowners in Australia who are potentially choosing Aussie, we're already getting a great experience. The reason why Aussie's been so successful in the past is because they sort of built the brand on a proposition of trust and hand holding people through that what is ultimately a daunting and complicated experience. The benefits that are going to be built on top of that, though, are if you maybe to bring this to life, if you think about this in the context of, say, booking a taxi, something simple like booking a taxi. If you sort of go back 7 to 10 years, the concept of calling 1-3 cabs or whatever the local taxi company was, waiting on the curb, sometimes in the rain, for maybe a cab to show up or not show up 20 or 30 minutes later, that was the norm. It was ultimately that taxi would still arrive. It was a car. There was a person driving that car. But ultimately, when Uber came on the scene, that whole experience is almost preposterous to think about. And what Uber's ultimately done is, and as I said before, this is perhaps a bit cliched of an example, but what they've ultimately done is they've put a technology platform in the middle, and all the questions, all the pain points. So, is the taxi going to arrive? How much is it going to be? Can I trust this person? Where is it? How far off it is? How far off is it? All of those things have been abstracted away to the platform, and ultimately make that human able to shine. If you relay that same example into the home loan experience, it's almost exactly what we're delivering with Aussie. So we have that technology today. We have that platform. So if you relate that to, say, an Aussie store experience, a customer will be able to, say, start online, go through, whether that's 10 o'clock at night when they put the kids to bed and they've got some time to look at their home loan, maybe they want to refinance and get some preliminary answers on platform. But let's just say it starts to get a bit too hard for them. They've got some questions around what happens next. They'll be able to live, transition or seamlessly transition that experience into a store. So that might be through booking an appointment at 10 o'clock the next day. It might be through engaging with their local franchisee on the chat functionality. But ultimately, when that experience transitions, they'll be able to do so in a way that keeps all the context. So they walk into that store the next day at 10 a.m. and sit down with the broker. That broker can sit with them and they can see exactly where the customer got up to. They can use all the tools on platform that aren't available in the space. So things like loan eligibility, serviceability eligibility, credit rules, all the things that we've built into our platform, documentation requirements or verification requirements. And it ultimately puts the broker or the person on a pedestal and really allows them to shine. And that's ultimately what the Lendi platform has done today to our existing brokers that serve the Lendi customers, and ultimately delivering that to the Aussie experience is really exciting because Aussie already leads from the front when it comes to service. They've got a great reputation in market, and this is only going to accelerate that.
Yeah. Having gone through the process of buying a house myself this year, as much as I'm a massive advocate and fan of fintech and innovation, I really struggle to see a day when you're never going to need a mortgage advisor or broker there in the middle. I mean, it's just such a complex, emotional process to go through that I used a broker and they were absolutely fantastic and uber professional, but the reality is that the emotional support that I got from that person, I couldn't imagine of not doing it without that person there.
Yeah, well, even if it's just sense checking, hey, I've top 3 recommendations of these, I think I'm going to go with Bank X. Is that the right decision for these reasons? It's going to be different customer to customer. And obviously a first home buyer is going to be very different to an experienced investor. And that's the beauty of technology, right? It allows you to deliver that experience in a seamless way based on what the customer ultimately wants.
Absolutely. Now, we've talked a lot about kind of digitization. I guess the other impact that we've had is actually on the workforce as well. You've gone from 400 and odd people last time we spoke to now over 600 at a time where nobody's in the office. How have you as a leader and as a leadership team managed to be able to bring these two different businesses and different cultures together and kind of start to create what is the Lendi Group culture versus Aussie and Lendi and kind of mixed together?
Yeah, look, to be honest, this is genuinely the billion-dollar question. The cultural elements of a merger are arguably the hardest bits. And, to the point you made before, to do that with the backdrop of a pandemic, where you've got people working from home the majority of the time is difficult. If I play that out into practicalities, we got a little bit lucky in some respects. So the merger completed in May. We signed the deal, or the binding deal to complete the merger in December last year. So we knew reasonably firmly what pathway we were on. And if you look at the New South Wales specifically, which is where most of our staff are based, kind of COVID history, January, February, we were still kind of coming out of that Northern Beaches cluster.
Yeah.
So, we were still kind of at home, but coming into February, March, we had quite a lot of clear air to work together as a joint executive team. And by that, I mean the Lendi execs and the Aussie execs to kind of work out what was going to be our plan on day zero, which was ultimately the merger completion day. So we had a good opportunity to do that in person. I think, like, if I take a step back and talk at a principal level, from a personal perspective and from a Lendi Group perspective, we're big believers of flexible working, and that being the future of work. We rolled out what we call our Flex First policy in Lendi middle of last year. We had it in draft kind of as COVID was kind of rolling out, but formally rolled it out to the business, which basically says we have no one mode of operating. It's flexible. We've got some frameworks that people need to follow, but ultimately we trust people to be adults and we measure people on outcomes. And, if you want to work from the office every day, we cater for that. If you want to work from home every day, we cater for that. That's kind of the place we start from. But I guess, to temper that a little bit, going through a merger, the culture side is the hardest bit, and whether that's the culture of the executive team or, to the point you made before, how do you build a new group culture? There's certain things in there that you can only do in person, or you can do much more effectively in person. So we had the luxury of being able to do a lot more of that leading up to May. And some of those activities were things like getting out and meeting all the stores. And so we were lucky enough and fortunate enough in April to do a roadshow around the country. We did another big roadshow in May. And then in June, we were able to spend more time kind of getting to BAU with the business before things kind of started to lock down again. But if I take a step back from that, so that's kind of the backdrop of the pandemic. And I guess that the short summary there is we were very lucky to have the luxury of being able to do some of that in person. But if I take a step all the way back from that and some of the comments I made before on flexible working, that's very much the core of the ethos that we're looking to build as a group culture. And one of the things we've had to be very, very deliberate about, and we're not there yet. We're definitely taking the right steps on the journey, and we've made good progress on it. But the way we view the group culture is it's neither Lendi's culture nor Aussie's culture. It's a completely new culture that kind of comes from both. And what we've got to do as we go through that process is make sure that we properly challenge ourselves on what are all the things that made Aussie great before, and how do we not lose those things? And what are all the things that made Lendi great before? And it's not even about taking a little bit from column A and a little bit from column B, and then all of a sudden you've got a group culture. It's actually about properly understanding what those things were, why they made you successful, and then how do you then right-size them for the group and create the new group version of those things. And that's the journey we're on now. You have to do that in a very much a bottom-up, top-down way. So it's a combination of both. You've got to have the bird's eye view to kind of pick it all up, but you've really got to drive it bottom-up.
Yeah.
And I think that's a journey we'll be on, for some time yet.
Yeah.
But it's something you need to stay really, really conscious of.
Yeah. One of the things that's really struck me is being almost that it's a tale of two different types of business. Those businesses that are under 100 people, I think, have really been able to fly with remote working and fully remote. Once you get over 100 people, it starts to get a bit more complex. I can only imagine that the structure that you've got within your business, where you've got retail stores, offshore operations centers, it must be an absolute kind of just headache of trying to figure out, well, how do we come up with something from a group-wide perspective when we've got these very, very different kind of areas of the business that require completely different things?
Yeah, I mean, you're not wrong. You have just described some of the operational complexity that we've got to deal with. I think there's a few different layers to it. So people and culture is a very broad topic, and it's everything from, what is your vision, mission, purpose, and the values that you want to operate through to operationally, how do you set yourself up from an organization perspective, through to how do you drive alignment across the organization in terms of what's important, how do we measure success, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it's no one thing in that bucket that you have to get right. You have to get it all right. And so we've done a few things. It's actually quite interesting because it gave us the opportunity as a group, going back to my points before about culture, to just really have a good look in the mirror and, take the things that we were doing before that perhaps we needed to, that were really crucial, like how do we double down on those things, and the things that we were doing before that perhaps don't have a place in the new organisation, whether those things were in the Aussie side or the Lendi side, allow us to leave those things behind. Like a good example of this is OKRs. We had rolled out OKRs in the Lendi business, I'd say organically over sort of the last few years. And there were some parts of the business doing it really, really well. Some parts of the business were aware of it at a group level and not really doing it at a divisional level or a team level, and everything in between. And this is a good example of something that we doubled down on to create that alignment. So we went through a very, very specific group OKR process where it wasn't just what are the objectives and how are we going to measure success through the KRs, but how does the concept of group objective setting work, and how do we do that in a way that's consistent, and how do we do that in a way that's not just creating a whole bunch of bureaucracy. And we put a lot of time and thinking from an executive perspective, from our sort of the people experience and culture team perspective. And we've had to do a lot of upskilling of people in the organisation. But sort of coming into our second quarter of this now, I feel like, if you think about the glue that holds a business together, often it's the alignment around what's important and what's not. And I feel like that's been one of the, not so much the secret sauce, but it's been, certainly making that decision to do that has helped us in while we've been locked down.
Yeah, I think the thing that really resonated with me when I have spoken with the executive team this year at Lendi is, something that I've been a big believer of for at least the last 4 or 5 years, and we've based our business model on it, is there's no really, I don't see a distinction between customers and your people. In fact, they're both the same people. And this kind of view of, taking almost like a customer approach to your kind of people and culture and values, where those two things, your values have to be exactly the same towards your people as they are to your customers, because your people are they're the front line, they're the brand. And I think that's something that's really kind of struck me whenever I've dealt with Lendi, is just how much congruence there is in how people act, behave, react, and kind of the intent that they have, and how congruent that is with the values of the organization, not just from the people values, but the customer values as well.
Yeah, and look, you've just described a whole bunch of the principles that we hopefully lead by, and we ask our people to hold ourselves accountable to. So I couldn't agree more. I think having an aligned team around what's important is it's the first pillar to being able to execute well.
Now you've, I guess, an OG Fintech founder here in Australia. We've got very, very few examples of founders who've kind of been on the journey from, sitting there in an office with a couple of people to now having a 600-person operation. What are some of the things that you've learned on that journey, David? And kind of, are there any kind of distinct phases of growth that you think are harder than others?
Oh, look, that's it's a good question. There's definitely distinct phases of growth that are harder than others. I used to describe the first, it's probably a defunct analogy now, but the first phase is when you can't fit on one floor anymore. So when you're sort of building a business in the first instance, I think the point you made before about teams of less than 100, which is roughly the rule of thumb, where you can fit into a large office floor. When you've got a business like that, things just happen organically. You know, if you need to have a conversation with someone, you can walk across the floor and have that. People naturally overhear conversations happening and get involved in things. You get a feeling for the vibe and the energy of the organisation, and you can stand up and you can see the whole business. So if you've got people that are disengaged, if you've got people that are incredibly excited, you can see that stuff straight away.
Really hard to do that on a 30-minute Zoom call once a week.
Yeah, exactly. Not to mention being able to even see their faces on the screen. So yeah, that's a distinct phase that's different, or that's difficult. When you sort of go beyond that, you've got to start putting in structures, rituals, and you know, it all centers around communication and alignment. But that's when things like objective setting becomes really important. It's things like having a cadence around information sharing for different things and managing change and all that sort of stuff becomes important. And those are often skill sets that first-time founders or founders who haven't built businesses at that level don't have. So we learned a lot of lessons along the way. We certainly didn't have all the answers. As you know, Dexter, the Lendi business was founded by 4 of us, and I think you can probably count us also quite unusual in the fact that the 4 founders are all still, almost 9 years later, 4 of the executives. We have a larger executive team now, but we're all still heavily involved in the business at a very senior level, which is also unusual. But if I reflect on our experiences before Lendi, we had all had experience building businesses to sort of, you know, 200, 300, 400 people, but beyond that was all new. So there's a lot of lessons we learned, and also, you know, probably the bigger one was just not so much a lesson, but something you need to remind yourself of all the time is on various topics, knowing when you're topics or themes, knowing for that topic or theme, when is the right time to level up and bring someone in with more capability than you might have. And some of those things we've done too early and some of those things we've done too late. And I don't think you can ever perfectly time those things. But it's something that you need to continually challenge yourself on. Because there are just some examples. I mean, marketing is a great example where, you know, me and one of the other founders, we ran that internally for the first number of years, and I think we did a pretty good job. But we saw a step change when we brought our CMO in sort of 2018, and that was a hard role to fill because we had very, very specific requirements, and it took us a year or so to find the right person. But you just get a lot of leverage when you bring the right people in to do stuff. So that's probably the bigger lesson.
Now, you've been around the fintech scene really before it was even a word or a thing in Australia. It's remarkable how much we've seen it evolve. And Afterpay with the Square acquisition, it's really yourselves, which it's just $80 billion in home loans. I mean, I just pinch myself when I say that number. What is it that or what's your general view of fintech in Australia and kind of where we're at now and what we need to do next to really kind of push on if we're going to compete globally?
Yeah, look, it's a really prescient observation. I still remember when we were raising one of our first equity capital rounds, like the word fintech definitely didn't exist, and we used to use the mining analogy where people were investing in African gold stock, and just think of it like that. You've got to invest a bit, and it's not going to be very profitable until it is.
Yeah. I'm just giggling because it reminds me of the blockchain crew right now and what they're going through.
Yeah, look, it's a similar example. I mean, people just don't understand it until they do, and I think we're clearly well past that point now. And the guys at Afterpay and other businesses like that in Australia have really helped kind of put fintech on the map, so to speak, because you've got a whole cohort of institutional investors across both the private and public space, as well as retail investors that all understand things. And ultimately, what we're talking about here is the confluence of availability of capital and successful deployment of that capital. So if there's capital to be invested and good entrepreneurs can take that capital and turn it into successful businesses, then ultimately that becomes a virtuous cycle. So I think, if I'm being honest, we haven't been involved in the grassroots part of fintech in Australia for some time. Yeah. I know that observing from the outside in, there's a lot of sophistication there, and there's a lot of people tackling those problems. And I think we're in a world at the moment where there's a lot of capital looking for a home. To be honest, I think the next step change is actually going to come from probably that next wave where, the generation of founders that we're probably part of. Yeah. There's the Prospers, the Zips, the Afterpays, etc. Kind of move on to the next thing, whether, for some of us that might be sooner than others, where that starts to kind of, that collective brain power starts to go into that next crop. Because I think the capital's there. I think the underlying infrastructure's there. And I know you've spoken about this stuff in the past, like the collaboration between banks and fintechs is definitely at an all-time high.
Yeah, I was going to mention that because that's another area where Lendi is a real pioneer. You I think, was it Macquarie, your first investor?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's taken a long time for others to kind of get there, and I think that's one thing that I would really, I'd kind of take my hat off to you and the rest of the Lendi team, was to recognize early that, hey, look, this is really hard, right? You can't just beat your chest and say we're going to disrupt and magic happens. It's a really, really hard road.
Yeah, and I think when you look at where that change or disruption or whatever you want to call it is going to come from, like in some instances it's going to come from things that are completely outside the system. Blockchain and DeFi is a good example of that, and clearly there's a long pathway that needs to tread for it to be outside of the system. But everything else is really inside the system. Even, the challenger banks or the challenger lenders is probably a better way to describe them. They still need warehousing from the big banks. Yeah. They still need institutional funding. And I guess what we've observed is, as you said, we've had a very, very close relationship with Macquarie since the early days. We were lucky enough that they backed us. They were our first institutional investor, and we've had a very, very long and fruitful relationship with the team over there. But it wasn't the same when we spoke to other banks at the time. And, we used to talk about, whether it was opportunities to work together on new projects, whether it was opportunities to integrate platforms and come up with new ways of doing things. The conversations 5 and 6 and 7 years ago were very much, oh, that's nice, that sounds interesting, we can see why that would work, but it's not a priority for us at the moment. Whereas the conversations in 2021 are, all of that's a priority. Yes, we're aligned. When can we start? When can we get the tech guys in a room and work out, if tech's going to be the blocker here?
Yeah.
It's just a stark difference, and it's just a testament to where the industry's at from a maturity perspective. In that, clearly the strategic roadmaps within the banks have all changed, and I think there's a common view that collaboration with fintechs is the way to go.
Yeah. So when you look at this kind of next 12 months and 2022, what's got you really excited about Lendi and where you could potentially head?
Yeah, so there's probably two sides to this. So the first is, like, our core strategy around the merger is incredibly exciting for us. So over the next 12 months, we will be delivering what is a complete game changer proposition to the broker market at massive scale. So taking the Lendi platform and delivering it to Aussie customers and Aussie brokers is incredibly exciting for whether you're an Aussie broker, whether you're an Aussie customer, whether you're someone in the industry that's observing and what that means for the way Aussies will get home loans. It's like genuinely a game changer, and very, very excited to bring that to market. Probably the second bit, and again, it is a bit inward looking, but you mentioned the $80 billion loan book. Like, that's one number, but it ultimately is emblematic of what what we are now as a group. We are the largest retail distributor of mortgages outside of the big four banks in Australia.
I just want to stop you there. When you launched Lendi, did you ever think you would say those words?
Probably not when we launched Lendi, but we have had that ambition for some time. We just got there a little bit faster, I think.
Yeah, it's amazing. Like, it really is. I mean, it's just phenomenal what you've achieved. And particularly when I look back at the last time that we spoke, right? The world was in disarray. I mean, I think we spoke in the beginning of May or the end of April 2020. And, we just didn't know what was going to happen. And yet, here we are 18 months later. Business is, almost doubled in size. Loan books, increased massively. It's just incredible.
Yeah, I mean, look, probably the takeout there is in fintech and in startups, time things happen very quickly. Lots get packed in, and I think off the back of all of that, what that scale ultimately means for us and our ability to deliver to customers outside of getting the brokers on platform is we now have a much bigger investment. Like, we had a very big investment in technology before, but we'll have something like 200 people working in Australia on product and technology by the end of this calendar year. And what that means outside of delivering that core proposition to the brokers and customers for Aussie, but more broadly for Lendi and our overall group, is just the investment we're making into new feature development, integrations, et cetera, will just continue to accelerate. And I think, given our size and scale, we're best placed to just continue challenging the status quo around what it means to get a home loan in Australia. And, we sit here at 6% market share today across the whole home loan market. And I think we've got a good shot at doubling that over the next few years.
Yeah. You've also been able to attract some outstanding talent this year as well. If people are interested in finding out more about careers at Lendi, where's the best place for them to head?
Yeah, just on the Lendi website, at the bottom of the page, there's a careers link. We're always looking for good people. And as you mentioned, we've been very, very fortunate to have attracted some really, really A-game players over the last 6 months in particular. And, we've got some really exciting problems that we're solving, and obviously, very, very purpose-driven mission that we're all on.
Well, David, it's been absolutely incredible to have you back on the show with what is, I think, has to be the biggest update we've ever had in over 130 interviews I've done now. Congrats to you and everybody at the team, and we're really watching with interest what happens with Lendi Group. I mean, it's just such a fascinating kind of development and period for the business now.
No, I appreciate that, Dexter, and thanks for having me again. It's always great to chat, and thanks for everything you do for the industry.
And you can connect with me, Dexter Cousins, on LinkedIn and Twitter. For early access to new shows and updates on the latest exclusive opportunities through Tier 1 people, subscribe to our newsletter by visiting the Fintech Chatter page on LinkedIn. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, remember to press follow on your favorite podcast player, and please consider leaving us a review. It really does help me in bringing in great guests and help fintech fans like you discover the show. Fintech Chatter is presented by Tier 1 People, leaders in fintech executive search. We'll help you launch, scale, and innovate by delivering world-class talent. And you can find out more at tier1people.com. Until the next episode, stay safe